Hello and welcome. My name is Rashi Mogha, and I'm your host for this Empowered Women of the World podcast, a podcast where we talk about technology, leadership, and success. As organizations focus on operational efficiencies, we continue to see layoffs across the board. While getting laid off is hard for everyone, it's especially hard for folks who are in US on work visas. There's so much uncertainty when you lose your job while working on a work visa. Many of the eWOW family members are here in US and they are immigrants, and I get messages from them almost every day asking for possible leads on jobs that sponsor visas so that they can stay in the country legally. So today I decided to have a guest who knows all about this. On our eWOW podcast, I have Sophie Alcorn, who is the founder of Alcorn Law and specializes in immigration law. Sophie is recognized as top immigration attorneys who is active in the Silicon Valley tech startup community. She supports various founders, companies, VCs, and professionals with their immigration needs. And in addition, she is also the host of the Sophie Alcorn podcast and the author of the best-selling book, Ask Sophie. Sophie, I'm so excited to have you on the eWOW podcast. I'm hopeful that our conversation today is going to answer so many questions on visas and how to navigate the immigration issues for folks who have been impacted by layoffs.
Thank you, Rashim, so much for having me here today. It's been great meeting you, and I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. I hope the information can really help a lot of people.
So, Sophie, I know your work as an immigration lawyer. I've gone through some of your podcasts. We've met in person, but I would love for our audience to hear from you about your work as an immigration lawyer, because you just don't work in the law space. You're also involved in some of the policy conversations.
That's right. So my dad was an immigration lawyer. My mom's an immigrant from Germany, and I grew up at my dad's side in Southern California, helping him in his immigration law firm in the 80s and 90s, helping send faxes to the INS before it was USCIS, having summer jobs there. And I really didn't want to copy him, but I became hooked because it's such a meaningful way to help people create better lives for themselves and their families. And really now working with some of the world's most brilliant people in Silicon Valley, creating startups. It's people who are really trying to make the world a better place for us all. So I think about this from a holistic view. You know, if immigration were fixed and I could go do another job, I would be very happy. There's a lot of other jobs I would have fun with, but I really, as my North Star in my lifetime, and hopefully it won't take that long, but I would love to see that US immigration is updated and functioning better. And if you wanted to take a step further, that people who want to help create abundance in the world could travel anywhere in the world to the locations where they can build what they dream about. So that's my North Star. So then I work backwards and I'm like, okay, maybe as I can help with solving high-skilled immigration as a first step in the United States. And so like last week, for example, I went to Washington, D.C. to meet with policymakers on Capitol Hill and brainstorm, what types of talent streams we need to support this AI revolution that's happening now. So I love engaging in that. I love coming at immigration from a variety of different angles so that it can actually be a tool that works for people.
It's so interesting when you talk about this, because businesses always talk about being global businesses, right? There is so much talent that's available. We work as a global village now, but really we don't make it easy with the visas and the immigration laws to really and truly be a global village, if you will, right?
That's right, for sure. There's a lot of lip service to those things, and it's great aspirationally, but the truth of it is that a lot of US employers are scared to consider the immigration process because they don't know what it involves. And they're often surprised when they find out it costs less money typically than hiring a recruiter to source a person for you. And startups are kind of in this interesting, they're such strange types of businesses. But for them, everything is urgent and important because the one thing is getting the product to market, scaling, and getting paid users. And They have to de-risk everything else about it, right? And so for the right hire, who they're usually hiring them as urgent and important, and they consider a global talent pool because they need to have the best
Yeah.
people, right? So often early stage startups are actually willing to be, quite helpful in the immigration sponsorship process for the right candidates. So it's been really been a pleasure getting to work with them because they just want the best people, and they have to move every obstacle out of their way to get those best people aligned with them. So it's fun having startups as clients.
That's great to hear because I thought that startups would probably be more hesitant than large corporations, but seems like that's not the case. How do layoffs specifically impact individuals on work visas? We're talking about H1B, L1, O1, any other categories that you can think of, Sophie, and how does it
Yeah.
impact them?
Yeah. Well, the main thing to know if you want to uh, prepare yourself so that you are, ready to move forward in any situation with whatever happens. If somebody is on one of these work visas that you mentioned, also including like a TN visa for people from Canada and Mexico, for example, and you're laid off or you quit, you would have, if it's before the end of your visa petition period, if the end of your employment happened earlier than that, then you do get the benefit of a 60-day grace period. And during that time, you can either make plans to leave the country or you can file for a change of status to B1, B2 visitor. And you're allowed to look for a job in B1, B2 visitor. So a lot of people in H1B try to find a new job in 2 to 3 weeks. So the new company has time to file the H1B petition before the end of the 60 days. And that's wonderful if you can pull that off, because then you can start working immediately at the new company. But just know that, during those 2 months, you can proactively file a visitor change of status as like an insurance policy. You can
Mhm.
always go back to H1B after that, or you could try to get an O1. You don't actually need an employer for an O1 now. You could do it with an agent, like a Hollywood movie star. And
Interesting.
then you could have a variety of self-employment options and consulting and gig work and startup projects. So there's a lot more flexibility and breathing room that we're able to infuse in the immigration paradigm right now to help people get more options to have security for themselves and their families.
That's very interesting because I did not even know that O1 provides that option.
It's
And
new. I just got frustrated that it didn't seem to work for startup founders. And over the last 2 years, I started experimenting like, well, if movie stars can do it and there's nothing in the law that says that technologists can't, let's just try it. And it's been working. And all those tech people get to have a lot of freedom before having a work permit, which is really
well, I
exciting.
know definitely that after recording this podcast, I'm going to call a few of the eWOW family members who have been
Excellent.
struggling because the job market is hard right now. It's
Yeah.
hard to find something in 2 to 3 weeks.
Oh,
And
yeah.
this might be an option for them. So I'm definitely
Yeah.
going to make some phone calls after that. So how can they maximize on this opportunity, right? You've been laid off, you have 60 days, you really can't find something in 60 days given the job market right now. Could you look for a job? Like, could you
Yes.
technically look for a job?
Yes, you're
How does
allowed to. This was a question I raised to USCIS a couple years ago when the layoffs started, and because people were really scared, like, am I allowed to look for a job in B2 visitor status? But the answer is yes. USCIS has put that on their website, so you are allowed to look for a job. So, during those 6 months, you can do a variety of things. You can't work, you can't make money until you have the right visa, but you can apply to jobs, you can take training courses, you could enroll in university with like day one CPT for maybe a higher degree level, like a master's, for example.
okay.
And then you could use that to start looking for work relative to what you're studying. You can become qualified for an O1A as a subject matter expert in your field by doing things that don't involve getting paid, like writing articles and giving speeches and getting other people to write about you and your accomplishments. So you could become O1 qualified by the end of it.
Mhm.
So there's a variety of things you could do to stay in the US during like 6 months of B1, B2 status.
That's interesting. Talk to me a little bit. You mentioned something about still being able to do your individual gigs and consulting work. And
Yeah.
most of the immigrants, yes, they want to stay in the country, but they want to have some source of income while they are here. They might
Hmm.
not have built that kind of financial blanket, if you will.
Right.
So
Right.
talk to me a little bit about that, and how does that work?
So the O1 can be petitioned by an employer or an agent.
Mhm.
And if it is petitioned by an agent, the agent can include an itinerary of services that the foreign national is going to do during usually the 3 requested years of status.
Mhm.
And so we can build anything we want into that itinerary as long as it's in your field of expertise. So you can qualify for an O1 if you have extraordinary ability in a field or subfield in a country or in the world. So it's easiest to target a field that's a subfield in a country, so it's more narrow. And then there's these like 8 categories, and as long as you prove 3 of them or more, then you can demonstrate that you've become qualified. And we often do that through like printed evidence from websites and letters of recommendation from experts and colleagues you worked with in the past. Um, and so once you define your field based on your expertise, if
Yeah.
hopefully you still want to work in that field, and then we can design an itinerary around that that's like, well, you're going to consult through this agency for 10 hours a week, and then you're going to launch this new startup and see if it works. And you have like a 10-hour a week paid W-2 job at this other company to do something. So it's a lot better than an H-1B because you can actually have multiple streams of income. You could be self-employed, you can be a contractor, consultant, employee. And the way I structure them, because I think it's best for my clients, is to put it all in such a way that projects can come and go so that whenever something changes, you don't necessarily have to file like a whole amendment on your visa.
And then is there some pathway for that O1 to then become eventually a green card or a permanent residency? Because that's another question that people have,
There
saying,
is.
will that transition be easy?
Well, I think easy is a relative term, but for immigrants and what immigrants go through, it might be. At least it's within your own, locus of control instead of waiting for somebody else to act on your behalf. So that's kind of nice, right?
Yeah.
But the O1 visa is very similar to the hardest type of green card, which is an EB-1A green card for extraordinary ability, and very similar qualifications, but the amount of evidence you need is at a higher level. You
Okay.
have to have had a bigger impact in your field. So if somebody gets an O1 first, it's wonderful because that is already evidence that USCIS will take in of like, oh, well, they've gotten an O1 and they extended their O1 and then they did more stuff. So yeah, they're EB-1A qualified now. That's kind of how they would look at that. Not everybody has that choice, because if you're married and you're on an H-1B and your spouse doesn't have their own H-1B, if they're like on an H-4 EAD and they're working, you don't really have that flexibility to switch to an O1 because your spouse can't work on an O1. So I have a lot of clients right now from India who have priority dates from the, 2015, 2019 time range. And their companies are, already did perm for them and they're still working there, but they would really love to create a startup in the future. And they really need to have a green card first because they already have kids, they own a house,
Yes.
their family needs stability. So we're upgrading them to EB-1A straight from an H-1B with their old priority date. And so that's a little bit more of a stretch argument if we're not like, oh, look, they've already had multiple O1s. But it can be done. Those can get approved. The most important thing to be able to show for that beyond the 3 categories is really like, how has your work affected how other people are doing
Right.
work outside of your company, but in the world more generally?
And this
Um,
brings us to such an important point, because most of the people in eWOW family community, they're technologists, right? And they
mhm.
really, while they spend a lot of time writing code, developing stuff, they really do not spend enough time building their personal brand. And in my experience of, having a couple of friends who have been through the O1 process, it's just so important to have that personal brand and people recommending you, you being on social media, you talking about the impact, articles being written about you. What's your perspective on that, Sophie?
Oh, I absolutely 100% agree with that. And it can be really hard for people with an engineering mindset to see the point of all of that
Mhm.
because it doesn't like one for one lead to an outcome.
Yes.
But it's really valuable. I've had clients who, as a result of building up their accomplishments for extraordinary ability, one of them got a book deal and then had a bestseller in her home country and now has a whole other education company as a result of it. And she had to write articles for her EB1 and she wasn't going to do it otherwise. So that was monumental for her. Um, and I am a testament to that because when I started my law firm out of my kitchen 9 years ago, when my kids were 1 and 4 years old, um, and I didn't have a Silicon Valley network, and I was just bootstrapping my law firm and trying to get going, eventually as a single mom. And I needed a roadmap for, how to market my law firm to clients
Mhm.
ASAP. Um, and I really, really wanted to work with just like super driven, curious, creative
Yeah.
people as my clients. But then I had a lot of imposter syndrome of like, well, who am I to try to get Nobel Prize caliber people as my clients? Why would they trust me? Um, and so one of my friends was like, fake it till you make it. And then it was like, no, don't fake it till you believe it because you already are it and you just have to believe in yourself. So that was like a growth thing for me. But also I literally followed the extraordinary ability criteria as a marketing plan for personal brand and business brand. And I was like, oh, writing articles. Oh, getting on committees. Oh, getting invited to join organizations as a judge. Oh, giving speeches could work. And so I was like, well, if my clients can do it, so can I. And I was like, if I go through all of this stuff, then they should be able to trust me because I've done it too. Um, and it
Here's what I
really,
tell all my clients, you're doing it for the first time, so you're not going to have the confidence to do it, because confidence comes from doing things multiple times. But you
um,
definitely should have the courage to do it. And courage
mm,
is accepting and acknowledging that fear, being a little
yes,
scared, and yet being able to say yes and
yes.
move forward with something.
Oh, Rashim, I love it. Yeah, I put that in my book actually. The definition of courage is it's like it comes from the like old French root word for heart. It's like you have to do it with heart.
Yeah,
Bravery is like brash and you're just like, oh, I'll just do it. But courage is doing the right thing even when you're scared. And so often we're scared, but we can do it and we have to try and trust and
we
believe in
have to.
ourselves.
So, a lot of technologists and a lot of people in the eWOW community, Sophie, have brilliant ideas. They want to start something of their own. And they were probably moonshining something, or they, now that they have an opportunity because they have been laid off, they want to move forward with their startup idea, but they are on visas, right? And that visa opportunity is gone now. How do you recommend that they move forward? Is there a way to move forward? Um,
I think it's all about conviction. There are so many ways to move forward, and we still need a real startup visa, but there are a lot of existing options. And really, it's just that decision that this is where you're going to put your time and focus, and then having that clear roadmap for action items to make it happen.
Mhm,
Um, it just depends. If you have a brand or if you have money, like how are you going to leverage those things? But you
mhm,
can absolutely work at your startup before you have a green card. I wish more people knew it and were willing to do it because actually it's easier to get a green card if you try your hand as an entrepreneur. You're going to do a lot of things that'll end up helping with the green card process.
mhm,
So if you're a little bit famous in your field, maybe you can get an O1 and then your startup doesn't really need to pay you that much, right? You can tinker with it for a while.
mhm.
Or if you have like a lifetime of savings that you've been racking away from your tech job, but you just are staying there because you're waiting for a green card.
Mhm.
Maybe you could invest in yourself and put some of that money into your company, and then maybe your company could pay you the H-1B prevailing wage. We've gotten part-time concurrent H-1Bs for startup founders to work on their side businesses in addition to their day job. We've gotten full-time H-1Bs for startup founders who even are the 100% owners of their companies. The law changed on this, and I wish more people knew it. There's sort of this assumption of like, oh no, I have to dilute my equity and have a 3-member board and like give power to some random American, and I don't want to do that. But that's not true. That was a practice that a lot of people did, 5 years ago. But at this point, we've gotten multiple H-1Bs approved for 100% owners of their startups
Interesting. That's
because the
very
employer-employee relationship definition changed. So we can use that.
wow.
So it's actually really great. And I think a lot of people, like if you're young, if you're not married, if like great, go for it. But I would even encourage people, maybe like it's a couple and both spouses are working. But I would even, consider, I would even urge them to consider the possibility for themselves financially that one of them could be a startup founder for a while, because
Yeah.
if so, there's definitely ways to get a visa at this point to make it happen.
This is amazing. I mean, this information is going to help so many people. I
Oh,
can totally see
wonderful.
your phone ringing constantly with so many eWOW family
Thank
members reaching
you.
out to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Rashim.
Sophie, what are some of the common mistakes that you see individuals on work visas, specifically when they are laid off, making, and how to avoid those pitfalls?
Okay, well, when you're in that 60-day grace period,
Yeah.
you have to, first of all, calculate the end of the grace period properly. It's 60 days after the cessation of work. No, so it's not like when the money lands in your bank account. Um, if the company is, maybe you can negotiate instead of a severance package, like a longer period of employment so that you have more time to work. So don't just like take a small check and then be willing to go off payroll immediately. If they're trying to give you something, like maybe negotiate with that to get more time for yourself to find a job. But then definitely, last day of employment is like, are you an employee of the company or are you not an employee of the company? And
Mhm.
so whenever that last day happens, calculate mathematically that plus 60 days, and then maybe like go back one day just as a
Yeah.
safety measure. And then you absolutely have to make sure that USCIS has either received your next petition or application by that day, or you've left the country. So just being mindful of the timing is critical. And don't work during that period. You're not allowed to make money. But if your paycheck comes from your old job, that's still okay because that was from when you worked before.
Oh, okay. So no consulting gigs during that 60-day
No, no,
60-day
no,
grace period.
no, you're
Okay.
not work authorized. Mm-mm.
Okay. Um,
But one way to have insurance for all of that is if you get a part-time concurrent H-1B before you're ever laid off. Like, I don't know if your current company is going to let you moonlight, but technically they can't prohibit you from doing that under California state law, for example. You still want to be careful about any like intellectual property stuff you signed when you got hired. But if you have another company, maybe in a completely unrelated area, that's willing to offer you a 5 hour a week job in addition to your day job, and they would sponsor you for an H-1B, you can just have that running in parallel and do that job in parallel. And then if the main company lays you off, guess what? You're still in H-1B status and there's
wow.
no grace period because you're just maintaining a 5 hour a week H-1B. And at that point, you could scale that up or you could look for additional work. So that
I
can be a
had
way to be
no
proactive too.
idea. I had no idea whatsoever that you could have two concurrent
Yeah.
H1Bs.
Yes. Okay. And here's the other thing about that regime, which is also kind of mind blowing. This is also new. It matters more for folks at the beginning of their careers who haven't been selected in the lottery yet. But if you get a part-time, like 5 hour a week job as a teaching assistant at a university or at a nonprofit related to a university helping students, you don't have to go through the H-1B lottery for that H-1B. And then a private employer can tack on a second concurrent full-time H-1B at a private company. in parallel. So you have to keep doing like the nonprofit or university job, but you could also, so that's a great way to stay here. Like if your STEM OPT is running out and you weren't selected in the lottery, and there's actual like nonprofits, popping up to offer that as a program. So we do a lot of those
Oh
as
my
well.
God, you're dropping in all these nuggets, and I am just thinking about how valuable this session and
Thank
this
you.
conversation is going to be for our eWOW family members. What is one most piece of advice, important piece of advice that you have for someone who is on work visa, who is facing uncertainty right now, maybe not laid off yet, but kind of see that coming, see that writing on the wall?
Um, my advice would be so this is what I told myself when I was going through hard times. It was, I have to learn how to take responsibility for my own happiness.
Mhm.
And so in this context, it might mean I have to take responsibility for my freedom, my peace of mind, my security, and then just be open to learning, because I've mentioned a lot of like new and interesting immigration possibilities. But give yourself the space to maybe think about, and this can be so hard for somebody in a time of uncertainty, but one of the things that I do when I talk to a potential new client for the first time is I say, okay, this is going to sound really silly, but I need to understand your goals and like why we're actually doing this. So here's my silly question to get to know you. If I had a magic wand and I could just give you a green card right now, this instant, what would you do, and why do you want to do it? And then sometimes it just completely blows people's minds because they're like, I've never had the permission to think about what I actually want to do in my whole
Yeah.
entire life. So I know it's hard when you're in a defensive state to think expansively about the future, but from a problem solving perspective, it's actually easier to reverse engineer immigration if you know what your personal, professional, and financial goals are, because then we can be creative about how we want to get there. So I would just say, take responsibility, be willing to think expansively, and then trust that there are probably several ways to get there that you can navigate. You can find the resources to help you navigate.
Sophie, I know we can continue this conversation for hours, but we have to wrap it up. What
Okay.
are some of the communities or places or resources that you would recommend for people who are genuinely looking for advice in terms of how to get started, how to really think
Yeah.
about their visa situation?
Mm. Well, I know USCIS has been doing a lot of like public information campaigns, and they have a Twitter account. So they're trying to put more information out there continually to help people.
Mhm.
My law firm, Alcorn Immigration Law, we try to do 2 public webinars every month, which are completely free. You can register at alcorn.law. I try to mix up the topics to cover a variety of immigration topics. Those webinars are now being posted on our Alcorn Law YouTube channel. So there's a lot of old recordings where I talk about a lot of the nuts and bolts of this.
Mhm.
Um, my book, Ask Sophie, The Founder's Guide to Visas and Immigration, is available on Amazon and Audible. I recorded the audiobook, so that's available. I have a podcast, the Sophie Alcorn podcast, so people can subscribe to that. I would love to have you on there, Rashim. So I would love to reciprocate. And
Do
gosh,
that.
there's one more thing. Oh, I wrote for TechCrunch for 4 years, and like Ask Sophie column, and all of those archives are posted for free on my alcorn.law website. So lots and lots of information out there, and you can always reach out to us for a consultation. Super happy to help.
Awesome. Sophie, it was such a pleasure to have you today on the podcast. Thank you so much for sharing all those insights with not just eWOW audience, but anybody who wants to capture those nuggets and really feel like they have options, not feel helpless. And today's resource for you, my dear audience, is a link to Sophie's website where you can find more information about immigration. The link is in the show notes. As always, thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you for loving, liking, supporting, and sharing the podcast. Remember, sharing is caring. I look forward to seeing you again in our next podcast. Till then, keep empowering the world.